We could sing the prayers, if you like, a couple of prayers, no harm. But the main thing is to remember what you're doing when you sing a prayer. You're just having thoughts, basically. You're having thoughts, and what you're doing as a Buddhist is basically programming your mind with new thoughts. That's actually what you're doing, as we've been talking. So then, with that understanding, prayers make sense. So the thoughts you're expressing in these prayers, then you have to understand them. This first prayer, the one on page, you see the little pink the refuge, it says. Just these first two will do. No, the first one, then the third one. Whatever. Maybe we do three. You'll see, the first two lines are expressing our reliance upon the Buddha and his Dharma and so on. Those of us who actually consider ourselves Buddhists, it's reminding ourselves of this, digging that groove into the mind. The second two lines are expressing this altruistic, marvellous motivation, reason for doing what we're doing, for the sake of something we're doing. Then the next prayer we'll do, the 7 limbs. That's really just a summary, these 7 lines, a summary of 7 activities that really sum up practice, in relation to the Buddhas, where we quotes, create, merit, unquotes. Relating to the Buddha, refuge, and then making offerings, which is very beneficial. Declaring your negative actions, delighting in your good actions, requesting strongly the holy beings to stay around us in samsara, requesting them to continue to teach us, and then dedicating all merits. We're going to talk about something. See the logic of all this type of practice. And then the third one is offering a mandala, as it says. Mandala just is from Tantra, the concept. And all it does is refer to the abode. All these different Buddhas, we'll talk about this too, try and get a deeper understanding of where Vajrasattva fits into the whole thing. Just the abode. So basically if you did a drawing, an architectural drawing of your house, that's your mandala. So, we see these circular ones, because they say the shape of the abodes of the deities, the entrance here, and the people this here and that there. All this is just an architectural drawing of where you live, your mandala. So when we're offering a mandala, what we're doing is offering the contents of this particular universe that we live in. So, of course, if you know Buddhist cosmology, you know Mount Meru and the 4 continents and the 8 subcontinents, and the fact that our sky is blue is because it's reflecting off lapis lazuli. We don't know that at all, do we? But if you don't know that version of the universe, then we know our version. So then you simply imagine, all you're doing in these types of prayers is you're using your creative imagination, and you're imagining all the marvellous things of this world, all the things that make people happy. The objects of the senses, in other words, all the beautiful sounds and smells and tastes and things. You literally simply are just piling them all up in your mind and then imagine offering them to the Buddha. And especially when we do these types of this prayer before a teaching, then the really most marvellous way to think is you're making this offering to the Buddha as if he himself were here giving the teaching, as a request for the teaching. Offering, giving is a very big practice. Again, we'll talk about this. Look at the logic of this. So let's do those 3 prayers, if you like. Sing along in Tibetan, have a look at the English words. Sangye chadang soke choknam la jang cho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi jinso gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drogpa sho sangye chadang soke choknam la jang cho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi jinso gipe sonam ki Drola penche sangye drogpa sho sangye chadang soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi jinso gipe sonam ki
Drola penche sangue dropasho.
And that was it means.
Gosum gupe gone chagselo. Nyasham yitrul churchin malubul. Togmene sagdik tung tam cheshar. Ke page wanam la jeirang. Korwa matong bardulek jutne. Drola chöki kolo korwadang. Jagjen genam jang chup chen ponyo. Saji peki juk shing metod. Chamri rabling ji. Ni de gen paji. Sange jing du mi te ulwagi. Trokun nam jag jing la chapasho.
And now as we say this little Sanskrit mantra at the end, we imagine the Buddha happily receiving our offering.
Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami.
Okay. So who's new? You're new. Okay. So okay. Well, for 3 days we've been talking about all the main points of Buddha's path, but not the compassion wing much yet. This nice analogy that I just love to use, that covers all the teachings actually, is that, as Buddha says, a bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. All the wisdom wing teachings are all the first stages of this, Tibetan packaging of the teachings known as the Lam Rim, this course to enlightenment. Let's call it the lower scope of teachings, and in the middle scope, I like to call it junior school and high school. We kind of get that, And that's the key thing about this marvellous packaging of the teachings that are unique to the Tibetans, actually. It's based on this text that Atisha, this Indian master, scholar, saint in the 11th century, when he was invited to Tibet, he wrote that kind of took all the essential points of Buddha's teachings and he presented in a nice, orderly but experiential way. And obviously experiential because when you study a course, you're learning it, you're learning something, you're internalizing it. So all of Buddha's teachings, he put them in such a way that they're orderly, step by step, that means to say in terms of your capacity to internalize them, like any course, and then to get the real experiential point, from it, not just to have an interesting philosophical discussion in our head. And so, if all the teachings that about the very first, like we were discussing, the very first level, junior school, is all the culmination of that part, all the little steps in junior school, culminates in the actual beginning of practice, where we abide by the laws of karma, a simple way to put it. We prime our minds up to that point to want to abide by the laws of karma. That's the essence of fundamental practice that underpins all the rest of our practice as we progress to high school, university, which is compassion wing, and then postgraduate, which is tantra. So this practice that we've been emphasizing, this one of purification in the context of the 4 opponent powers, these 4 psychological steps, that part of it, that the general idea of purification is actually from junior school. It's related to tantra, related to karma. The practice we use of visualizing Vajrasattva and reciting his mantra, that's from Tantra. So we're combining these 2. So the first level is to abide by the laws of karma, as we've been talking. And the more we understand this, the more we actually get in tune with Buddha's actual views. The fundamental view of Buddha's is that every single thing any mind does, and then the actions of our body and speech that fulfill the needs of that, fulfill those thoughts, Everything comes from the thoughts, the mind. That's karma, and that process is the main cause of happiness and suffering. That process. What goes on in the mind, which leaves imprints in the mind, or seeds in the mind, is what ripens in the future as our very experiences. So it's a very simple concept, but very hard for us to get our heads around because we're so used to the opposite view that someone else made us and that things out there are the main cause of happiness and suffering. We're addicted to that view, and it's really hard to change our mind, take on board Buddha's view. You know. This is the basis. And of course that idea of karma is based upon the Buddha's understanding of what the mind is, because mind is what does karma. Actions, intentions is the meaning of karma. Karma is what minds do, essentially, fundamentally. And what minds do is the cause of happiness and suffering. Main cause. That's it. It's not complicated. So we need to understand the mind. If we understand karma and understand the mind, we've got Buddhism down. Not all the way, but it's the absolutely fundamentals. And in both cases, profoundly different views of the world than the ones we have in terms of Christianity, in the creator model, and in terms of the, or if we compare with the materialist model, which is the either view we have instinctively within us, deeply in our bones. So it takes time to unpack those views and to replace them, if we so choose, with the Buddhist views. So it's basically, we've been discussing, it's all views. It's just ways of seeing things. And that's what Buddha says. The very meaning of reality comes from the mind. Nothing exists that doesn't depend upon thoughts for their existence. Nothing exists that doesn't depend upon thoughts for their existence. That's the meaning of subtle dependent arising, which is the meaning of emptiness. So as Lama Yusi says, we create negative karma with our minds. So we can purify that by creating positive karma with our mind. It's up to us. And of course, as we've been talking, the more we understand the law of karma, how it functions, how the mind works, how it does what it does, and how it leaves imprints, and how it ripens in the future's experiences. This is also an example, karma is an example, the law of cause and effect is an example of the first level of dependent arising, which as Lama Tsongkhapa says, which is, as Lama usually paraphrases Tsongkhapa, is the king of logics, to prove emptiness, which of course is the point, finally, that Buddha is making, and all of Buddha's teachings are leading us to that insight into the absence of anything that doesn't depend upon thoughts and concepts. But the first level of dependent arising is proving to us that there is nothing that doesn't depend upon causes and conditions. Well, strictly speaking, among impermanent phenomena. So thinking about karma, I'm used to saying it in America, you see, I've got to say karma there. If I say karma, no one understands me. So I get used to saying that. And then people told me off for my American accent. I'm sure it's not very American. I'm sure it's not American at all. But I get used to saying karma, 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 karma. So, anyway, I forgot my point, of course, chatting away. So thinking about, you see, I find thinking about cause and effect in terms of I, which is to say cause and effect are cause of karma, but the things that what I did in the past are the cause of what I am, is such a profound, marvellous, tasty method for stopping ego grasping, stopping the self-pity me, stopping poor me, not fair, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, everything else does it, everything else is done to me, and I'm just this innocent victim, which is the actual taste of ego. It's the taste, the feeling of I. It's actually the irony of ego. We use that word in our culture, and it sounds like big and strong, ego. But the way this word, we use it, using it in it's used very colloquially, actually, just literally, it's Greek for I, isn't it? It's just Greek for I, ego. But we use it, it's a good to say ego means the clinging strongly at the belief in the intrinsic, pointable, findable, real, independent self in there. So this first level of dependent arising, that everything comes into existence in independence upon causes and conditions, that refers to everything. But karma is when you talk about it in relation to the object called I. And so inevitably, inexorably thinking about how, in fact, whatever happens to me, all the good things and all the bad things, aren't just random, aren't good luck and bad luck, which is the instinctive view we have now. That they're all the fruits of seeds I planted. So this has to take away the suffering of the poor me. It just has to. This is the most logical way to smash ego grasping, to lessen the self-pity of the poor I. And it's the first example of dependent arising. So it's leading us to understand emptiness, lessening the grip of the self-pity me, which is what runs the show now, which is what we believe in totally, which is the cause of all suffering. So as in dependent arising, Tsongkhapa really runs with this dependent arising one. King of logics, as Ramanuja paraphrased Tsongkhapa. Of course, it's all Buddha's teachings. It isn't Buddha's main teaching, but Tsongkhapa really runs with this one. There are many, many logical reasons to prove emptiness. They all say, as it said, the king of logics, the best one, the best one, the best one, to smash the belief in the intrinsic I. So there's different, in Buddha's teachings and different traditions, there's different ways of presenting this absence of a self-existent I. And if we think about the first level of dependent arising, and there are three, this one helps us counteract the grossest level of grasping. So all the Buddhist schools would say that everything, that the I that does exist, that what does exist, that the grossest level of grasping is the grossest level of grasping at the I is believing in an I that is permanent, that is not impermanent, that is not dependent upon causes and conditions. All the Buddhist schools deny that one, counteract that one. That's the gross selflessness of all the lower schools. So thinking about cause and effect, which means in this case for us, thinking about karma, is the perfect way to counteract that one. So tasty, so immediate, so powerful, so applicable to every single moment of life. Because why? Because every second of life, because we are run by attachment and aversion, the two main voices of ego grasping. They're the ones, attachment's the main one after ego grasping. It's just the default mode, as we talked yesterday. The default mode is this frantic, desperate assumption that I must get what I want every second. It's just there, driving us, second by second, at the level of deep assumption, unspoken, deeply instinctive, a deep, frantic assumption that I must get what I want every second. That's the way attachment works day to day. And so because that's what drives us, and we assume that that's the cause of happiness, this is the second kind of suffering in the second noble truth. In the first noble truth, there are three kinds of suffering. This is the second one. So sneaky, honey-covered razor blade. We actually assume that's happiness. So in other words, our methodology for happiness is to get what you want. We just take it for granted. So when we, in our lives, get the nice food, nice smell, nice taste, nice comfort, nice body, nice husband, nice whatever, that's what we mean by happiness, isn't it? That's what we mean. And we spend our lives pursuing that. And the millisecond, attachment is thwarted, doesn't get what it wants, or gets what it doesn't want. That's called suffering. And that's what arises, anger, aversion. Aversion is what arises when attachment is thoughtful. And so then whenever aversion arises, that's what we call suffering. Whenever attachment arises and gets what it wants, that's what we call happiness. And what Buddha says is this is the second kind of suffering. It's terrible suffering, subtle kind of suffering, honey-covered razor blade. It's a nightmare. And it's the suffering of attachment. And these two are the consequence of ego grasping, a consequence of stating the inherent I in the first place. And the whole taste of this way we live life is there's no causes. It's just random, accidental, cross your fingers, hope for the best, not fair, poor me, good luck, bad luck. Total ignorance. That's actually the philosophy of no cause and effect. That's the philosophy of no cause and effect. And that's how we live. That's what we think now. So thinking about karma, cause and effect, counteracts that. Therefore, helps loosen the grip of the self-pity thing every second. And this is what we have to apply every second of life. Because every second of life, based upon attachment and aversion, based upon the ego grasping, which is the view of no cause and effect, is happening every minute. So we have to counteract it every minute. Because every second of our responses are lies. They're not accurate assessments. They're lying assessments. We're lying to ourselves. And they're instinctive, these views. We've had them for countless lives. So thinking about the first level of dependent arising, how things come into existence independent upon causes and conditions, in relation specifically to I, karma has a multitude of benefits. First of all, straightforward, it helps us understand impermanence. Helps lessen the other delusion, the grosser delusion, of grasping at permanent self, which is a grosser delusion than grasping at inherent self. So immediately it counteracts that one. Helps us understand impermanence. Just by that one alone, but it leads to helping us understand emptiness. It's a stepping stone. By understanding impermanence, it's a stepping stone to understanding emptiness. And even when we have an understanding of subtle impermanence, it can be mistaken for an understanding of emptiness. Theravada meditating practitioners, they're mainly meditating on what's called subtle impermanence. And they say it leads you automatically to see emptiness. We could debate with that. You can even mistake it for emptiness, because it is so subtle, and it is so marvellous, that it's a stepping stone. It's not emptiness. But it's marvellous. So it has a multitude of benefits. Thinking about karma, the causes and effect, cause and conditions of what produce I. So using that to argue with the instinctive view that I'm a victim, it's not fair, poor me, good luck, bad luck. It lessens grasping and aversion. A multitude of benefits. And it helps lead to emptiness. First level of dependent arising. And in order to have all this happen, we have to know the words, of course. We have to know the teachings. We have to study the teachings. These are really precise technical terms that are used for very precise concepts that we have to identify. Otherwise, we have to say the words. We have to know the words and then slowly taste the meaning. Just like when we learn anything. Cooking, music. You've got to have the right theories first. Then you can begin to put the experience onto those bones. So the second level of dependent arising is the subtler selflessness for most of the schools of thought, but the gross selflessness for the Prasangikas. Which is that there is an I. The wrong view is that there is an I that doesn't depend upon the aggregates. And this is the strongest way we feel. To think about this already is not the subtlest meaning yet, but it's marvellous to think about this one. This is so tasty. We began to discuss yesterday, maybe the day before, I can't remember. Just look at this now. The vividest feeling we have of an I is like the landlord, like I said. You know, I haven't been doing it much these days, but these days lately it seems to me I'm thinking a lot about all the different thoughts in our mind. Basically our mind is made up of millions of thoughts. They all come down to being thoughts, and every thought is a view. Every thought is an opinion. Anger is a thought. It's an opinion about somebody. It happens to come along dressed up with lots of emotion. That's why we call it a feeling. That's why we can't see it comes down to being a concept. But this is what we must see. So every thought we have is an opinion about something. And so then, what happened? I lost my track. Where was I? Yeah, I remember. Why did I say this? What was the reason I began to say even anger is a thought? I'm so sorry, I've lost the plot. Second level dependent arising. Thank you, okay. Okay, good, thank you. Yes, thank you. Our head is full of thoughts. Trillions. So it's almost like a seamless movie, isn't it? So many. And they're just going non-stop, 100 miles an hour. We have no volition. We don't sit there and think, oh, I better think a thought. What a joke, you know. Isn't it? So the thing is, all those thoughts in there, as we discussed before, we can see that the subject of all of them is I. Isn't it? The subject is I. And the feeling we have, absolute, 1 trillion % belief, is that walking along hand in hand with a part called anger, and another part called jealousy, and another part called love, and another part called nose and hand and eye, all the bits of me, walking hand in hand with those is another part called I. We believe that. One, without question. But if when we start to question it, it gets confusing and annoying. That's our belief, 1 trillion %. We act, feel, assume utterly this one. This is the second kind. This is how there is an I that exists, that we think the gross misunderstanding is that there is an I that does exist separate from the parts. It's not too difficult intellectually to counteract that, which is the first step. To get it experientially, it's another discussion. So let's do a little experiment, Do a little experiment. Just got to use words. I will say, let me get this clear here. I will say, my table has a clock, a cup, and a vase. Get everything else. Now like we talked yesterday, one of the most necessary things we have to do is we have to establish that things do exist, because Buddha talks about how things do exist conventionally, and then things have an ultimate existence. So we first have to establish what a conventional thing is. You can't just talk about something until you know what you're talking about. This is how come we can all converse very civilized. We can say, please pass the cup, and I'll pass the cup. Not because we're geniuses, because we've all agreed, we've all shaken hands, that that's a cup. A flat-bottomed container that holds my tea. That's called cup. We all agree with that. We know the English word, the sound, we know that one, we recognise it, our eyes look, we go, there it is, there's a cup. We establish things, conventionally. Okay, so I'm stating what I consider as a fact. My table. Now, as soon as I say my table, your eyes will look over to here, because the sound is coming from here. When it says my, you mean me, and that means it must be here. So you see a table next to Rabina, so you deduce that's my table, if I say my table. If I say the table, you're confused because there's 30 tables in the room. If I say my table, so this object is called my table. That's one. Has, we know what that means. A clock, we know what that means. A cup and a vase. That's a statement I'm making. That's an opinion I've got. You check with your eyes, you check with your realization of English language, and we tick off all the boxes, and you'll all go, yep, I agree. Now, to really prove conventionally that's a true statement, to really prove it, we need to first be clear about each of those words, those phenomena. Then we have to really make sure we are accurate, we would have to then point out those different phenomena. So how many phenomena have I mentioned? Say them. Say them. My table, particularly. My table. 4 phenomena, right? You agree? You agree, don't you? 4 phenomena. So to really prove that there are, conventionally speaking, those 4 phenomena, we would have to point out a table that is not a clock, a cup, or a vase. Would you agree? And you'd have to point out a vase that isn't a clock, a cup, a clock. You get my point. You have to point out 4 separate, individual phenomena that has their own label and their own function. It's common, ordinary common sense, isn't it? This is how we live our lives, dealing with facts and figures. You understand? Good. We can do that, can't we? Now, I will say another statement, that I have a hand, a nose, and a foot. Do you agree with that statement? So how many phenomena have I mentioned there? How many phenomena have I mentioned? Phenomena. Now, how many nouns? How many phenomena? What are the 7? No, just now, this minute, this new statement. I have a hand, a nose, and a foot. How many phenomena? Oh, really? What about I is not a phenomenon? The I have a hand, nose, and foot. So what is I? Is that I is not a phenomenon? Okay, so 4 phenomena, precisely. Like my table, but here in this case the statement says I have a hand, a nose, and a foot. You accept? You clear? Same argument. Now, if that's a true statement, merely conventionally, no drama, nothing special, no tricky, you must point out 4 phenomena. You accept? Do you accept that? Like I said before, if they exist. If they exist. Yes? Okay. There's my nose. Cut it off. Very simple. Boom. There it is. A nose. There's my hand. There's my foot. Where's the piece called I that isn't a nose, a hand, and a foot? No. Where's the piece called I that isn't a nose, that isn't the hand, that isn't the foot, and indeed is not the mind, the brain, the pee-pee, the caca, and every other bit that's there? Where is the piece called I that isn't those? Isn't it annoying? I beg your pardon? Well, precisely, because it's easy to say it, but, to have the realisation of it. When someone punches you in the nose and you don't freak out, that's the proof that you've realised it. But it's a really simple statement. It's annoying, isn't it? Is it not annoying? Because we think there is an I, and we act as if there's one. We believe it every day, every word, every thought in the mind. The subject of it is I, and it's usually unhappy I, mean I, not fair I, poor I, how dare you do that to I did not do that to you, I am hopeless, I'm no good, I'm better than you think I am. Is it not? This is not how we talk. So who's this I with? I mean, it seems so stupid to talk like this. I mean, to say there's no I, when it's so patently obvious. We feel there must be. We're arguing with it, like your first statement. Well, it's sort of all of me. It's like saying, where's the clock? Well, it's sort of all everything. Don't be ridiculous. You can't have it like that. We've got to be more precise. So this is the second kind of dependent arising. And it's already so tasty to go into this one. To really analyse this one. Really analyse this one. To loosen the grip of the profound belief in an inherent I. This is not the subtlest argument yet. Pardon? Oh, no, there is an I, conventionally. Well, that's all I'm talking about, isn't it? But that's all I'm talking... No, I didn't say that. No, you're leaping ahead. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I'm talking about ordinary second level of there being. We think there is an I in there that is separate from the parts. That's not the inherent one. It's not the subtlest one yet. And so, what I'm saying is, conventionally, there is an I. Okay. What's the definition of a clock? What's the definition of cup? We've been discussing it, right? Remember, we have to first establish. Look at the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness. Emptiness is nothing other than form. Technically not a true statement, as they say, but you can't... The point here is this. You can't have the emptiness of something without something. You've got to have a something first. So that you've got to first establish a conventional phenomenon. Then you can discuss how it exists. That's why emptiness is an impossibility to be nihilistic. It's like a complete joke. So in order to begin to talk, even to open the mouth, we have to establish things with the thoughts. So we have, in order to discuss impermanence, emptiness, pink, we have to first establish a phenomenon that has emptiness, that has impermanence, that has pink. And in this case, we call it a cup. So we first establish a cup. So how do you establish the existence of a cup? We say it's that flat-bottomed clay container, the first part of the definition. Then we have to have the second part of the definition, which tells you its job. It holds tea. Then we have to prove it's that. We get the tea and we pour it in and we see that it does fulfill its function. And then we've got to do one more thing. We've got to check there's no other valid cognitions of it that counteract that. Then once we've got that down, now we can be confident that we have a cup. Conventionally, it's exactly the same with I. So, my name is Robina. Robina is the name, the label we give to this phenomenon here. Conventionally, the, not fat-bottomed, but fat-bottomed Australian nun. I mean, whatever, you understand? Labelled Robina. So that can distinguish this object from all the other objects in the room. It's a very simple thing. You've got to know that, otherwise we're all confused. Oh, there's Robina. No, that's Rosetta. No, come on, they're all the same. No, they're not. That's Rosetta. So we establish the phenomenon called Robina, conventionally. So to discover if there is this I, because Robina calls her I Robina, if there is Robina, which I instinctively feel is an inherent Robina, a Robina that is a part walking hand, like the mini-me I said. We think there's a mini-me in there that's walking hand in hand with anger, love, kindness, and all the other bits of me. And all we're saying in this discussion of the one in relation to parts is you can't find that one. This is not the subtlest meaning yet, but it's really tasty. This is subtle dependence. This is the gross selflessness for the Prasangikas. It's extremely helpful, so necessary, very vivid every day. Because the thought, you see, this is the point that's so hilarious, this is the third subtlest point now. I, quite literally, is a thought. Just like I had a cake. They are thoughts. They're thoughts. I had a cake. Now the thing is, conventionally speaking, if there was a chocolate cake there, and we got the chocolate cake, we got it clear, it is a cake, we all agree, and you saw me eat it, then it's a correct statement conventionally that I had a cake. Right there, it's a perfectly correct statement, conventionally. I had a cake. But what Buddha is saying is, this is where it's so difficult for us, we have an assumption in that statement that we don't even recognize. I mean, we have a million assumptions in that statement that are packed solid that we can't recognize. But what we mean by that is an inherent independent I, inherently independently had, an inherent independent cake. This view of inherent existence is assumed in every microsecond of what we think and do and say. It's just packed there, solid. And we can't see the difference between the conventional I and the inherent I, the conventional had and the inherent had, the conventional cake and the inherent cake. We can't see the difference. And that's what we have to learn to do. And this is why the teaching of dependent arising, that there is a conventional I and an ultimate I, or ultimately there is no I and conventionally there is an I, so these two, which seem utter contradictions to us, in fact are stating the same thing. This is why the most marvellous of the King of Logics, dependent arising. Because as Tsongkhapa gets us to do, the most perfect technique, to not rush off to the wrong view of nihilism every time we say emptiness, and not to cling to the permanent, inherent, intrinsic, delicious thing as soon as we say dependent arising. He gets us consciously, every time we say there is no cup from its own side, there is no cup in and of itself, there is no cup intrinsically, there is no self-existent cup, there is no inherent cup, they're all synonyms. As soon as we say that, or we say the cup is empty of inherent existence, or the cup is empty of being intrinsic, two different ways of saying it. The second we say that, because we have these deeply instinctive, mistakes in the mind, We instinctively hear there's no cup, and we chuck it out. We go too far. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a great statement in English, isn't it? It's not in most other languages I've discovered. It's a wonderful statement. It really is so perfect. You chuck the baby out with the bathwater. That's the extreme view here. And we good Buddhists, when we talk about emptiness, oh, it's all empty anyway, it doesn't matter. That's a statement of nihilism. That's a totally incorrect statement. It's completely wrong. It's a wrong understanding, and that's how we instinctively hear emptiness. Mistake. So we just go there. Then we hear that there is a cup that does exist, that does function in dependence upon causes and conditions, parts, etc. As soon as we hear that, we're relieved. Oh, thank God there's a cup after all. Grasp. And we go to the other extreme of overstating the cup, of reifying the cup, of eternalizing the cup, that there is a cup. Thank goodness. As soon as we hear dependent arising, we hear that. These are the two extreme views, and our mind runs between these two all the time. So what Tsongkhapa gets us to do, it's so tasty, we've got to really do it, is every time we hear there is no cup on its own side, every time we hear the word emptiness, we consciously refrain from going to the extreme, and we say to ourselves, ha-ha, Robina, that means, so to hear there is no cup from its own side, I have to say to myself consciously, that, hey, Robina, that means there is a cup, for, dependent upon cause and conditions, etc. That means there is a cup, dependent arising cup. You force yourself away from nihilism. Every time you say there is a cup that exists in dependence upon this and this, to stop the grasping, the reifying, you say to yourself, and this is a really strong one, consciously, no, Robina, that means there is no cup from its own side. Because these two to us right now appear absolute opposites. So this really squeezes your brain to say this, which is what we need to do. Because, of course, the Buddha says this is totally true. They mean the same thing. They are the same, finally. Dependent arising is another way of saying emptiness. Emptiness is another way of saying dependent arising. They have to point to each other. Because that which is existing in dependence upon this and that has to be empty of being independent of this and that. This is logical. It's another way of saying the same thing. That whatever depends upon this and that is empty of being independent of this and that. Whatever is depending upon something has to be lacking independence. It's obvious. So being independent of causes and conditions, being independent of parts, and being independent of naming is what we think now. And so understanding interdependence on these three things, understanding how everything lacks being, lacks that independence, is what we have to think about. And of course, it's just words for us now, but so is theory of music. You first learn music, you just haven't got a clue what they're talking about. This is our biggest problem in Buddhism. We tend to think, it's so intellectual, how can I understand that? It's so high, how can I possibly... It's completely wrong. I mean, we're such geniuses in the West. We've studied so many things. We've learned so many skills. We've got so many thoughts in our mind about this and that, how to make cakes and computers and engineering and science. We're brilliant intellectually. So what makes you think you can't understand this intellectually? It's complete nonsense. Of course you can. So think about it, study it. Don't mystify it. It's really insulting to yourself. It's not mystical. Of course, to experience the meaning is another discussion. Well, so is musical theory, so is cake making, so is anything. You've got to learn the theory first. You can't take a step in the right direction until you've got the right theory. But we don't get that when it comes to spiritual practice. We keep thinking, oh, that's just intellectual, I'm bored. Of course, the danger is thinking that you've understood it because you understand the intellect. But that's like thinking you know how to make a cake just because you know the recipe. You forgot you don't know how to make a cake. Oh, make me a cake, please. Oh, no, I can't do that, but I can tell you the recipe. When you think you know cakes and you know the recipe, you're in trouble. So, of course, intellectual knowledge is one thing, experiential is another. But without intellectual, you can't have experiential. And we don't like to hear this. We keep thinking, no, what about this and what about that? And maybe it's a good thing to talk about. So can you see how you can't have a direct experience of something until you've got the theories right? I don't think we accept this, actually. Anybody got any points about that? Question? Any question? Oh, darling. Well, you want to talk about maybe which one do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about impermanence? Do you want to talk about partness? Or you want to talk about label? Which one do you want to talk about? There's three. So which one do you want to discuss? So you want to talk about the third level, merely labeled. You don't want to talk about the I that's independent of parts. You want to talk about the subtlest level of dependent arising. Okay, go on. It's the label that's given to the continuity. Yeah, that's right, exactly. Well, of course, how can it be there? It's not there. It's really different. How can it be there? You want a separate part called I. Well, then how can you say it's in the aggregate? You're just stating you think it's there. So you think there's a part called merely labelled I in the aggregate. That's your question. You said, where in the aggregate is it? But that's what you asked me. So that means you're assuming there is a part called merely labelled I, along with the other five. Is that your question? Well, you said that, though, so what do you really mean? So tell me what you really mean to ask. Okay, so tell me what you really mean. The consciousness, okay, when you're dead, I'm sorry, I forget Cherry's husband's name. I forget your name, darling. He's my friend and I forget. Al, that's right, Al. So here's what Al, okay, label for this piece here, for these five aggregates, right? So when Al dies, by the time you get to the very subtle consciousness of Al, the continuity of the consciousness, there's just this very subtle consciousness there and the very subtle wind energy. There are no five aggregates. You agree? There's not. So the basis now for the label Al is this. But when it's the very subtle consciousness, that's the basis of the label I. That's all. That's all. Simple. Same. Who does? What? What's that got to do with it? No, sorry, stop. What are you saying now? You go all over the place. Al, what are you saying, darling? Okay, that's a new subject, new paragraph, new heading, new chapter. Okay, now, what's the next point? Go on.
So the conversely, the I that doesn't exist in animals as well.
Well, of course, I mean, Buddhist psychology and philosophy and karma refers to all sentient beings, so that's assumed here. No difference.
How is that manifest in the consciousness of one?
You mean, how does it feel ego grasping? Like you and I do, but 10 trillion times more intense.
So without language and concept.
That's right, they don't have, but there's an instinctive, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, the grasping at the inherent I is there in the deepest bones of our, or deepest instincts, even in the mind of an ant. It's just there, driving it. Its attachment drives it. Its aversion drives it. Observe its body language. Deeply instinctive. What point? What's that got to do with your first question?
How does that I manifest in the consciousness of the
Same as yours. Same as yours.
without labeling?
But just instinctive, that's all. It's the same as a baby, just instinctive. Instinctive, that's all, because they haven't developed smarty pants talk like we do. Just instinctive, primordial, the motor that propels it for every microsecond of what it does. Instinctive. And why it gets away from the other ant trying to eat it, or is because the same reason that we instinctively move away when a mozzie wants to take a drop of our blood. It's just programmed grasping at the inherent I. Yeah.
On that, so an animal would have a stronger,
10 trillion times stronger.
yeah,
Yep.
even though it is a land will make it, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's stronger.
Just totally, they're just like walking instinctive eye. Totally. Programmed, like a lion. She's programmed. She's come into this life completely, like we have, but we've fortunately programmed a bit of access to our love and kindness and wisdom, haven't we? That's the only difference. We have access to some of our love and kindness and intelligence. If we're fortunate, we'll use it. She can't access that part of herself. It's all there, buried deep under the primordial instinct of ego grasping, and then all the qualities of a lion's mind coming along with that lion's body, you know.
Nowadays, more domesticated animals in the world.
Huh?
Nowadays, there's a lot more domesticated animals.
Which animals?
Oh, cats, dogs,
Oh, yes, domestic cats. Sorry.
than there were maybe 200 years ago.
Oh, because there's more people, I suppose.
Yeah. So
Anyway, go on.
with domesticated pets in country, do they try to by living with us, dog, for example, would try to in a way try to be like us, and that way
I don't think it's consciously. I doubt very much it does that. But let's remember. But let's remember. Let's remember who we think all these animals are. You know, the reincarnated owners of pets, because we're also attached to our animals. Guess what kind of rebirth they take? You know, budgerigars and cats and dogs. You know, so luckily you're born as an animal in a pleasant environment where you're treated nicely and got good food, got good consequences of karma. But you've got the lousy throwing karma. You know, you've got good experiences similar to the cause, good environment because you're around humans who aren't going to eat you up for breakfast. I mean, if you're a rat in the same house, it's a different story, isn't it? You know, so you know there's some virtue there that they've got. They're born in a nice environment, but what good can they do? You know, nothing.
Still better than the lion. Chance of
It doesn't have it has a chance only if we help it have a chance. Like, you know, if your lama Zopa Rinpoche, you'll be like we were in New Zealand one time, and he got us to gather the goats into the field, and we locked them in, and we put speakers up, and then we read sutras to them. You know, like every time he meets a creature, a fly, an ant, a mouse, a flea, a cockroach, he'll say prayers to it and feed it. And he was in the zoo in Singapore. I remember I was there with him in the Singapore Zoo, and he's having his photo taken with this big ape, and he's out shouting like crazy mantras into the ape's ear. And then there was this porcupine that he was whispering prayers into the ear of, and it was completely mesmerised. Like, you know, Lama Zopa was saying prayers, leaving virtuous imprints in their minds. That's when you can help your animal. Otherwise, it's just using up its merit. All it does, your little doggy, your little pussy wussy, you think is so cute, is sitting there in its ignorance all day. You go to work, 8 hours, what's it doing in its mind? Nothing but ignorance. So this is where you can help your animals hugely. Because remember with karma, we've been talking, just naturally, everything any being sees especially, and hears especially, leaves an imprint, a photo, an impression. So how marvellous a gift to your animal who has no chance of creating any virtue on its own, and all it's doing is using up its virtue by being born as your pet and living in a safe environment. At least you're protecting it from being harmed. But it's not creating any merit, it's using it up, using up all its virtue. So you put imprints in its ear of the Buddhas and the holy beings, it puts a powerful imprint. Then it's got access, and when it dies, and it hopefully dies peacefully, it can, those will help access its goodness and get a decent human birth. Otherwise there's no benefit. There's no benefit in being an animal in a domestic environment. It just uses up its virtue. Huh? That's what I'm saying. That's what I said. We leave our animals kind of in this thinking it's cute, the pussy's so cute and safe, sleeping all day. Completely using up its merit and just creating more negative karma. Tragic. What he looks up, he offers them strawberry and cakes. What do you think? I mean, I'd stand around him too if I got strawberries and cakes. Of course, we freak out and throw them away. You know, he's nice to them.
I mean, the other thing is that humans have as animals,
Well, that's the point, isn't it? That's what we're talking about. We've got access to intelligence and kindness and goodness, and that's the one, that's our saving grace, and if we don't use it, we might as well be at fault. What time? Sorry, say it again. What? Yeah, good. Go on. Good, good. Good, go on then. Good. Go. Bright meaning. Yep. Right, exactly. And then? Right. I hear you, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. Uh-huh. Right. Okay, good. Okay. I understand. Yes, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh, cool. Okay. Let's analyse that. Okay, that's called attachment. The total bottomless pit of craving to be approved of by you. They've got, doggies especially, are a personification of attachment to being loved. That's a non-virtue. That's a delusion. I know it sounds so cruel. Let's analyse each piece. Not trying to be horrible about dogs. I love dogs. So that's called attachment. So a dog is a sentient being who, its species is one that we feel close to as humans, isn't it? And over the years, like we're talking about the relationship between genes and blue eyes, over the years, all the minds that have gone into the dog bodies have sort of built the dog bodies over the centuries, haven't they, to be these nice domesticated creatures. And so then a new mind comes along that's got the karma to be born into that dog womb, who turns out to be your dog. It's got, what's your name? Sarah. It's got this. So there's Freddo. What's his name? Your dog? Harry. So there's a little sentient being called Harry who's got some karmic connection with Sarah, but he's got a dog body and you've got a human body. And so the relationship is set. He's the domestic one. He's a cutie, and he wants. And so you're the boss. He's very clear about that. You know, you're the boss. Okay. So he's born with an animal mind. So we'll say a few things. So first of all, Lama Zopa says, I don't believe you, just listen to it. He said, if just for a couple of moments you could experience directly the mind of your Harry, the suffering would be so overwhelming that you would never bear to even sleep another second to waste this precious human life. Now that's impossible for us to see, like exactly what you're saying. Exactly. It seems impossible. That's right, precisely. That's right, precisely. Yep, that's right. Because that is called, okay, that's the same happiness that we get when our attachment gets what it wants. So a junkie, okay, forget the junkie, but that's what the happiness of attachment getting what it wants is called. Okay? And that's what a particular type of animal called a domestic dog has bucket loads of. Unless, of course, it's a fiercely violent dog that's, has been programmed to eat you, and you've got to put a thing over its mouth every day. You can see it's got a much more fierce personality. But your little Harry clearly has a cute little, typical little doggy-woggy personality. But that's, this is when we have to understand what ignorance is, ego grasping. Then we have to understand what attachment is. And then on the basis of attachment, not getting what it wants, then has aversion. And we have to understand how, then we have to understand what intelligence is and wisdom. So yeah, of course, there's some intelligence there. You can't say there's not. There's a wish to please, but that's called attachment. So we've got to analyse those really subtly and really carefully. And then we've got to look at, well, what's the point? Then what is the difference between a human mind? Okay, why don't you tell me then, based upon you knowing Harry and you knowing yourself, what's the difference between Sarah's mind and Harry's mind? What would be the difference? What would be some qualities you have got you think that Harry hasn't got? Yes, this is the point, isn't it? So think of you. Okay, how come he didn't bring Harry today? No, but how come he didn't come? Did he say, oh, I'd like to come to the teaching, Sarah? Did he say that? No. Would he be able to listen to these teachings about emptiness and have a conversation like you and I are having? I don't think so. Okay. Would you not agree that that's one of the characteristics, that if we're fortunate as humans, we do have and can access and can use to some great advantage, whereas poor Harry can't? Would you accept that? Okay. Okay, stop. I didn't say that. Fish don't have legs, but they have other ways of getting around. They're very good. Birds are great. They fly. You know, that's correct. But that's not what I'm discussing. The key point, and all Buddhist psychology is pointing it out, it's hardly rocket science, but it's not meant to be sort of saying dogs are horrible. It's simply looking at what it is that we do have as humans that are advantageous, that can help us get the hell out of this mess that we're all in. If we assume, basing on Buddha's view, that we are in a mess, which is full of attachment and aversion and ignorance and pride and everything. So if we can see that Sarah has got that potential, because sometimes she's sitting here listening, analysing, thinking. Harry doesn't have that. So Harry can't get himself out of his suffering. He can't. He can be happy. He can make you happy. How kind. He's creating some virtue that's good for him. But he can't use intelligence. I mean, does Harry bark when the front door opens and the back door opens and things? His eyes look, when strangers come, he looks big eyes, barking. Runs away. A lick, okay. Okay, well, he hasn't got too much paranoia, that's fine. But many dogs, you know, they'll hear the gate squeak and they'll okay, because they've got more sensory perception. Big deal. That's nothing special. But that's okay. But anyway, these are the things to think about, aren't they? That's all. But it's interesting how, yeah, it's all you can do is think about these things. And in the end, of course, your dog's probably much kinder than many humans. There's no doubt about that. But the key point is, well, there you go. You see, now you've got to look at that. Would you kill a rat? And you had, yeah, but would you he'd probably do it with his teeth, wouldn't he? Wouldn't do it with his hands or put his gloves on first, would he? He wouldn't say, oh, I don't want to touch it. Would you kill it for me, Sarah? He wouldn't say that. He'd get his teeth, wouldn't he? Well, think about that for a while. Think about that. For a reason determined by whom? Sorry, darling. Well, okay. We have to analyse what wasting means, don't we? He's not creating virtue. Okay, what wasting means, as we've been discussing in Buddhist teachings, but at that moment, it means a virtuous thought, which means wisdom, which means a thought that isn't grasping at the eye. It means a thought trying to give up attachment. Next time I try to kill that rat, I won't try to hurt it. The thought not to kill, that's what virtue means. Not just sitting there passively. That's not virtue. That's ignorance, sweetheart. Not something mean, you know. You have to analyse. And when you say there's a purpose, I hear your point. Of course he would, because he wants you to love him. Just like if you have a husband, they would pick up on your moods as well because they want you to love them. Same thing, darling. It's called attachment. It's called attachment, sweetheart. There you go. Anyway, it's interesting to think about, isn't it? That's right, Sarah. Thank you very much. It was a good discussion. Thank you for being brave to say all that. Go, sweetheart. You go. Yes. We're in India. Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Yes. Yep. No, probably I'd say it's got some karmic connection from having been a monk in the past, perhaps. It's got a strong connection with that particular place. That's why it's born there. And due to instinctive habits, it does that thing. Cool, that's all. Everything. That's all. Yeah. Right. Help it. Yeah, same as your grandma and your grandpa and your mother, just prayers. Prayers. Because you've got a karmic connection, you just have to pray to the Buddhas. He be born as human, meet the Dharma, become enlightened, all that kind of thing. Yeah. What's your name? Lisa. Yeah. 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 Right, that's right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm losing you a bit, Lisa. I'm so sorry, I'm losing you a little bit. Okay, we have to first analyse what we mean by love. Love is a virtue. It's under the heading, there's positive states of mind, negative ones, neutral ones. So love, in Buddhist view, is this altruistic state of mind that is an empathy with others that delights in their happiness and wants them to be happy. Okay. We have that, but it's only ever mixed with attachment. Okay, so that is what love is. So that, no, stop, that's what love is. So I doubt that a dog has that. A dog, there's some aspect of that. There's some, because of it's this domestic type of creature, the evolution of this being, that minds that go to a dog body have, because they have this connection with humans, they like humans, they're comfortable with humans. Obviously, Harry has a strong karmic connection with Sarah. There's a connection there, like the husband has a connection, or the baby has a connection. This Harry has a connection. So there's this close karmic connection between these two minds. That's how it is, It could have been a mummy from 3 lives ago. So there can be an aspect of showing some love there, affection. But it's if even with us, most of the love we give now is completely polluted by attachment. Look what happens when your husband gives you up for a younger version. It's very hard to want him to still be happy. You have to struggle with that, because when he loves you, when he's attached to you, it's easy to want him to be happy. So that's why we've got to be really clear about what is love and what is attachment and how tricky they are together. So I'd suggest an animal, a dog especially, there's some kind of affection there. There has to be. There's a tendency of that, but 99% attachment. Cool. When we understand our own, then understand the dog's. We don't see it like this in the West. It seems very cruel initially. It's very clinical, the way Buddha talks about these states. But this is the fundamental point of Buddhist psychology, this absolute distinction between a non-virtue and a virtue. And they're all mixed together like water and milk for us now. We really can't distinguish. And this is the big part of our practice, to do this. And we can see it in our mind, we can see it in the dog's mind. I'm not sure. Your point, you're satisfied with your point? What's the question? We all are, hopefully. Some people like it, some people are attached to it. So what's the question? Well, of course it is. Everybody's attachment harms them, so what's the point? Increasing their attachment, yeah. But then this is the problem. If they're your wife and you've got 3 kids together, you can't just say, I'm going to stop her attachment, so I'll leave her. That's cruel and unusual punishment, You've got to accept it's reality, it's human beings. So you've got to do what you can to not... This is the trouble with ordinary relationships. That's what we do in our relationships, normal relationships. I love it. It's a nice phrase in the West. They call it codependence. That's what exactly the playing out of attachment. Because I'm so desperately for you to look at me and praise me, and you're desperate for me to approve of you. We're constantly thinking about each other when we're not there, and I'm adjusting everything I do to try and make Korik happy, because that's what we think is love, but actually it's attachment. It's really fierce. And so to go beyond this and have a wholesome sense of myself and do what is authentic and correct, even if you get unhappy, that's a brave thing to do in a relationship. So we feed into each other attachment like vampires all the time. That's what's so horrible about our relationship. And of course, when the attachment stops, it turns into anger and fighting. You understand? So to give up attachment, at the same time have a loving relationship, that's a very courageous thing to do. Do you understand? And it's very hard. Because you can't control the other person. Very tricky and minefield. Yeah. May I know your name? Alan. We met before, haven't we, Alan? Yeah, I thought so. Go on. Yes. No. Oh, totally. Even the way the death process is in the gross con, even before you stop breathing, by the 4th stage of death, when this wisdom, they call it, this awareness of who you are and what you are and where you fit in everything, this sense of this you, this conventional Alan in the world, that's already gone. There's a deep instinctive grasping at I, there's no question, like primordial, like the ant, not an articulate thing. That's just gross consciousness. By the time you get to subtle consciousness, which is like a dream state, there's no longer a sense of our and I, but there's still an instinctive grasping deeply there. And then when you finally leave the body, absolutely it's very subtle consciousness has any kind of volition, none at all. It's just the imprints. But then when you wake up into the intermediate state, like a dream state, you even might see your body, Alan's body, but you're no longer a connection, no longer a sense of being me anymore. You don't want to go back there. But there's still a fierce grasping at the instinctive level of self, which is propelling you to find a new rebirth. There's a conscious, okay, if I've got a strong habit to kill, the mosquito, I'll just feel it while I'm chatting to you being really kind. Just spontaneously, I'll go like that. I won't even pay attention. I won't even blink from what I'm doing with you. But it'll be in my mind, totally instinctive. I program my mind from the past, and I won't even remember doing it. That's so one of the many, when we do negative actions, one of the things that makes it very negative is when it's deeply habitual. So it's virtually instinctive. Whereas if I consciously kill it, I go, oh, I don't really want to kill mosquitoes. Oh, I think I might kill a mosquito. Maybe I'll kill a mosquito. I better not kill a mosquito. That's when it's conscious, when it's actual at the level of thought. Vivid thoughts, not communicating. When it's deeply instinctive, there is the thought there, but it's so instinctive. There is the thought there, but it's so like a million miles an hour. We're not conscious at the gross level, which is why we do most things. We call it instinctively, don't we? We walk and talk and drive the car and make the tea. Don't we? Most of these are because we've practiced. Wouldn't you agree? They've become instinctive. So it's almost like there's no thought there. You could say that because we're so programmed. But when you go down into the mind through concentration techniques and get to the subtler level, then we can unpack all these deep instinctive beliefs, concepts. But they're virtually instinctive, which means you might as well say there's no thought there, but they all come down to being thoughts, which we have to unpack and unravel and change. Stop. 90% of what we do in our life is based on, we're already programmed from the first second of conception with all these imprints to do what we do and think what we think and say what we say. We act out all the habits of the past life. We program them. Everything we do in this life is from past life. We just act it all out. Mindlessly. That's instinctive. So we have to really look at that and reprogram the instinctive until we become instinctively loving, instinctively wise, instinctively kind. Takes time. Yes, very much. Well, you could say it like that. It would sound a bit sort of cosmic. You can say, of course, you can say it this way. It's like saying, there's a rose pops up today. Oh, you mean that seed was planted 14 years ago? How fascinating. Well, maybe 6 months ago, I don't know. Of course it was. Yeah, of course it was. It wouldn't happen otherwise. Of course it was. But it's obviously extremely intricate. In other words, this is why we can change things. If I'm sitting on a mountain and I can see the road below, and you're driving from this side, and I test that you're going at 72 k's an hour, and there's another car coming, and I do my quick calculation, assuming you both continue to drive the way you're driving, assuming the world doesn't collapse in a minute, assuming the mountain doesn't fall down, assuming a million other things, the law of, it will be that you'll crash in 2.5 minutes. That's perfectly reasonable to predict that. And it's all set up from before. But if you put your foot on the brake and change or stop, other things can happen. And so that's how come you can purify things. But if you let things just act themselves out, it'll all ripen. It was interesting. Reading this book I'm reading at the moment, is totally ripping me. It's called The Undead. It's by one American science writer. He's very clever and very funny, and he's done masses of research on all aspects of the whole dying thing, Like really how impossibly difficult it is in the medical world now to actually describe what is death. brain death, this death, brainstem, this one, that one, really, it's like, and there's so many experiments going on and so much confusion about who a person is when they really die. All the things that they're doing, it's just fascinating. Then all he did a chapter on these people who have near-death experiences. And he's not religious, so he doesn't know what to conclude from all this. But it's totally fascinating because it utterly fits with the Buddhist model of gross, subtle, very subtle consciousness. And so one of the many things that people experience in these near-death experiences is what happens is they leave their body, and that means their subtle consciousness is now vivid. They watch their body. The people in operations watching their body, this kind of thing. Out-of-body experiences. Then they have these near-death. They all have these vivid things of white light and beings of light. Never mind all that part. But one of the commonest experiences is vivid, clear seeing of exactly what's going to happen. And their experiences prove it exactly. I remember even one time in Australia, I read some book years in the 60s, one doctor wrote a book who hypnotised, and people under hypnosis, the things that they would see. And one fellow, he had this complete vision of the entire Melbourne Cup. You know, this race on the 1st November of every Tuesday, isn't it? First Tuesday of November. And he could see, he came out of the hypnosis and they joked, and he said, this lady was a polka dot dress, and this horse won that one, this, and they all joked, and in fact it was exactly like that. He saw it all. No, he didn't. He didn't. Well, he's stupid, he didn't. But he saw it all, and then people come up with these completely clear visions of exactly, and the point is that's all that is clairvoyance. And that's what subtle consciousness is capable of. And Buddha says we've had clairvoyance in countless lives in the past. We've lost it. We've lost it. We haven't used the mind to realise emptiness. But that's subtle consciousness, and that's the level of mind that we're capable of accessing using these techniques that the Hindus developed, called single point of concentration. That's when you can prove past and future. You see it. You see the minds of others. You see past karma. You see future. It's not complicated. And this is the thing. We think it's all just cross your fingers and hope for the best, or just random. And so, it's not. It's very simple. If you were a brilliant gardener, even a reasonable gardener, but I knew nothing about botany, let's say, and then you proceed to point out to me this, what looks to me like a bare ground, but you've planted seeds. And you can predict very nicely, can't you, how that garden will look in 50 years. You can do that accurately. And I'll be blown out. I'll say, oh, wow, you're clairvoyant. No, and I will say, wow, you're clairvoyant. And you'll say, no, Rabina, I just know the laws of botany. Well, this is the laws of karma. It's not surprising. But we're so shocked by this because we assume it's unknowable. We assume it's all unknown.